So, a multi brand technology company was losing market share to a single brand competitor. From a content perspective, the obvious diagnosis was, well, that the content team wasn't producing enough. So, what do we do? Push them harder, add AI, do more with less, of course. But yeah, that's completely wrong. They didn't have a content problem, they had an alignment problem. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rose Colored Glasses. I'm Robert Rose, Chief Strategy Advisor for the Content Marketing Institute, and this is episode 4, the final installment of our May series on the end of campaign first marketing and the beginning of something maybe a little bit new. So quick recap of where we've been. Of course, episode 1, we made the case that content-led marketing is what's going to come now after 30 years of campaign era workarounds and sort of the old content marketing of old. Episode 2 laid out this new operating model that makes it real, content operations versus what we like to think of now as content orchestration, and the 5 dimensions where that org chart really starts to hold up the work or just doesn't. And then in episode 3, we got into the executive conversation, the long horizon inversion, the pitch that finally gets funded these days. And today's the finale. We answer the question all 3 of those earlier episodes kind of built toward, and like when this actually works, what does it look like? How does it work and sort of take to get there? Well, let's talk about it. So about a year ago, I worked with a multi-brand technology company, 5 operating brands, plus the corporate brand itself. Acquired over a decade, losing ground every day to single brand competitors, smaller, faster, more focused than they were. And from the content team's perspective, they felt it really the hardest, so the knee-jerk reaction was all those brands just needed more content, more AI to make more content, more productivity, push the team even harder to produce, to get that search engine optimization that was actually starting to lag and sort of the conversions that were starting to drag. The actual problem, however, was that the company's own brands, well, they were kind of competing with each other. 3 of them essentially telling the exact same story to the same buyer audience on the same channels. We called those collision zones when we talked with them. And then there was content that was getting made, a lot of it, but it was diffused, it was redundant, undifferentiated out there. So the audience really couldn't tell any of these brands apart, so that they didn't look any different than the single brands that they were actually competing with or even each other. So it was really interesting, the sort of cleanest summary of what their biggest challenge was. And by the way, what we see the challenging inside most marketing organizations these days came from my colleague, Kathy McKnight. And as she put it, she said they didn't have a content challenge. They had an alignment problem. Said simply, we see a 4-stage maturity model that starts to explain where this company was and where they had to go and where we might go. So what we see is stage 1, that's campaign-led marketing of old, right? We've all been there, where the content team, if there even one that exists, is basically an on-demand vending machine of digital assets meant to support over and over the campaign machine. Create lead magnet or blog post, run campaign, rinse, repeat. Then there's stage 2, the content factory, and it's where many of the clients we work with are these days. And this is where there are both the content vending machines, of course, for varying degrees of brands, but also plus some sort of underserved proactive effort. Maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a resource center, a community, an email newsletter, or some other platform that's super hard to measure because it's never really had any purpose other than traffic and SEO, and also gets sort of deprecated when the campaigns need their thing. All of which is sort of slowly dying with the SEO and traffic because of, well, everything that's happening in the world right now. Then there's stage 3, which is where we actually start to add integrated governance and supervision to it, and what we might call content orchestration these days. We have organization, we've got purpose, collaboration, prioritization on the effort. We talked about this at some length last week. And then finally, there is a stage 4 where we see an integrated media operation, where content orchestration becomes integrated across all forms of the media output from the entire company, from shared to paid to earned, distribution, even managing a consistent story or stories across all the surfaces that they're doing becomes the focused strategy of the business. Now, the hardest transition we see is moving from stage 2 to stage 3 because it usually requires introducing some governance level that just didn't exist previously. You've got to add a shared decider and decide who they are and where they're going to get to decide and what they're going to get to decide. And this is exactly the work Kathy and I do with the clients at Seventh Bear and the ones we work with Content Marketing Institute, diagnosing where the content operation sits on that maturity model, and then designing the orchestration framework, coaching the leadership teams to see that value through the change management process, and ultimately helping implement that change into an organization. Okay, so this multi-brand technology company. So let me tell you what was actually happening here. So the company had grown by acquisition over the last decade, 5 operating brands plus the corporate brand. And each brand had its own marketing leader, its own content history, its own loyal audience, and its own definition of what good content looked like. So every brand's team was very talented. Every brand's tool was in place. Every brand's strategy made sense in isolation. In aggregate, however, they were kind of undoing each other, right? 3 brands telling essentially the same story to the same buyer and the same channels, the collision zones as we call them, and customers really couldn't tell why they were different, so they really didn't. The content function then was a centralized team of 5 people, and very talented and very overworked, doing 95% reactive work. The loudest brand stakeholder at the time got the most attention. Quieter brands, well, they might go silent for months on their blog, or they might go silent at all for looking at SEO content. At the editorial meetings that were happening, they did happen on a pretty regular cadence, but they were just informing everybody of what was happening in these siloed brands. They were rarely deciding anything that hadn't already been decided in some other side conversation within the brand itself. And so when my Seventh Bear colleague, Kathy McKnight, and I, we came in to do some of this audit work, we looked at the executive team and they expected us to find a content team that needed more capacity, more headcount, more AI, more technology. And we found, quite honestly, something different. The content team didn't need to be bigger or faster or smarter with AI. Of course, they could use all of those things. They could be bigger, they could be faster, they could be smarter with AI, but that wasn't the problem. The enterprise needed a team empowered to make big decisions on behalf of all of the brands at once. In other words, they needed somebody with the authority to say, yes, this is what we're building now. This is not what we're going to build now. And this is how we're going to spend the resources we already have. So we help them. We help them architect that alignment, the processes, the roles, the ways of working across the different brands, cross-functionally, across marketing, PR, comms, and sales. And we help them stand up what they ended up calling a Content Orchestration Council with real cross-functional decision rights, 2 co-leads, an execution lead, and representatives from across the different brand portfolios. The council became the arbiter of good, as we like to call it, across all the stages of work, and it had the authority to say, yes, this is a gold project, build it right now. And just as critically, this is not a gold project, not right now, to the reactive requests that were coming from those vocal stakeholders across the business. Underneath the council, the same 5-person content team kept doing the work they were already really good at, but what changed was how the work got prioritized. Editorial themes were now set at the company level by the council. Each brand's content lived inside those themes, expressed in the brand's own differentiated voice. Story packages were modularized so a single core narrative could be reused across multiple brands and multiple channels. A phased path. First 3 months, leadership endorsed the model, the council got formed, the shared editorial got stood up, the narrative architecture got agreed to. Next 6 months, story packages built, voice, tone standards, all of that, guidelines established, KPIs defined. The model piloted on a single enterprise theme. Just try it out, one enterprise theme. All of those things. Then months after that, the orchestration expanded to the next and the next and the next. Quarterly executive review cadence came online. The AI enablement framework was now activated because we know exactly where AI can help, and the model went live across the entire brand portfolio. And the part that I really want to stress here is that no new headcount was required. None was available, by the way, but none was actually required. Same 5 people, same tool sets, same budget. The transformation came from adding governance and process, not adding more capacity. The content team that had been the bottleneck now became the engine of an integrated media model. And a year into this new operating model, the brands now operate together for the first time. Every brand still has its own voice, its own audience relationships, and now owns them, by the way, its own niche expertise. The company now has one shared editorial backbone, one shared decider, and a measurement model that joins the brands into a cohesive company-level strategy. And the brands, they have the strength of marketing campaigns to sell and a content orchestration model to make those campaigns land in audiences that already know who they are. So decision speeds went up. Meetings on content actually decreased. Reactive churn went down. The previously silent brands started getting attention because the council balanced where that attention went. And the previously loudest brands didn't lose their voice. They just had to share the calendar a little bit. This is what content-led marketing really looks like when it's actually working. Not bigger, not faster, just better aligned and better governed and producing work that compounds across the portfolio instead of competing inside it. Now, across the work that Kathy and I have done over the past year, the same pattern starts to show up in every single engagement that really works. The companies making the shift from stage 2 to stage 3 are not the ones with the biggest content teams, not the ones with the deepest budgets, not even the ones with the most enthusiastic CMOs. They're the ones whose leadership teams agreed to share a decider, create something that gives that decider, whether it's a team or a person, real authority. In other words, as we often say, the decisions you make are not nearly as important as actually making some. Every team doing this does about the same 5 things. 1, they build some form of the council, right? Real cross-functional representation, real decision rights. Without authority, it's just another standing meeting letting everybody else know what's going on. 2, set those editorial themes at the company level, not at individual product or brand level, not at the campaign level. The themes create the shared meaning everything else can cascade from. It's so much easier to make little things out of big things than try to make big things out of a lot of little things. 3, modularize content for reuse. Build those narratives and components, not finished assets. The finished assets get assembled from the components. 4, replace reactive work with planned work. Even when reactive feels productive, especially when reactive feels productive, that's the signal you're still in stage 2. So replace that reactive work with planned proactive work where you can. 5, measure what compounds. Audience growth, asset reuse, share of voice, pipeline velocity over time. Not page views, not download counts, not the things that Campaign Era Dashboard already measures. None of that requires new tools. None of it requires new headcount. All of it requires the alignment about an agreement upon what was previously not there. And here's the thing about content-led marketing in this particular season. The same thing we said at the close of episode 1, right? We don't know really where this is the final form or if this is just yet another place in our evolution. 5 years from now, some marketer is going to look back and diagnose what is wrong with this content orchestration the way we're diagnosing it now. That doesn't change the present work. The companies that build these orchestrated media operations now will be positioned to evolve into whatever it is that comes next. The companies that stay in the content factory or the on-demand content machine, well, they'll be relitigating these same fights 5 years from now. So that's it. 4 episodes, 1 argument, hopefully. Basically, we've said that the campaign was always kind of a workaround for not having an audience. And content marketing, yeah, it's been a workaround too. Content-led marketing, the integration of those things, the merger of both of those things is the new method of going to market. And when that operating model makes that merger real through orchestration, not just siloed operations, all of those things come together. And that changes the way that we pitch a media operation, a content-led marketing operation, not a content program, a long-term vision of an orchestration operation. And today, we can see that it works. We can see a company that has made it work, and the companies that are building this now are going to be the ones positioned to compete in 27 and 28 and 29 in the years coming ahead. We won't be just relitigating the same arguments about content marketing that we've been doing for the last 10 years. The map exists. You can find yourself on it. The next move is yours to make. Remember, it's your story. Build it well, and I'll see you next week.